Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. Well, something like that. By which I mean, we're back talking Assail by Ian Cameron Esselmond, the final novel of the Malazan Empire, and today we're talking about chapters 9 and 10. I read them today. I hope I'll remember what I read because my brain's a bit fuzzy at this point. I don't exactly know why, but that kind of thing happens from time to time. So we'll see how this goes. Also, we don't have really good beer right now because I ran out of that cool beer and the shop up here doesn't have any right now, and I didn't get down into the city, so to speak, to actually get a new one. So we'll have to deal with regular beer today. Anyway, let's do this, shall we? Cheers. Alright, so it's getting fighty, sort of, I guess, here. And I think that's like sort of what we need to talk about today. There's a lot of battles going on this time round, and things are getting tighter. So where are we going with this? I guess like the first thing that I wanted to look at here is, I mean, we basically have Kyle coming first to meet the Heels, who we've met before in Orb Scepter Throne, remember? And, well, then from there he goes to the Losts, or tries to go to the Losts. He hasn't gone there yet. On the other hand, we have Ormond coming down into the battle, facing Lochi, sort of. Yeah, all of that stuff. That's sort of like, I feel, the main thing going on, but we also have at the same time battles, at least kind of battles and stuff going on the sort of, I don't want to call them civilized, but on the invader side, and that's sort of like the other side of the conflict. But more or less everyone at the end of chapter 10 is in the same area, that is somewhere between Mantletown and up there in the mountains. Alright, so that's sort of where we're at right now. So the first thing I wanted to look at is, once again, the idea of wealth. And there's an interesting conversation we have there, or Kyle has there, when Kyle walks through the forest, right? And he is held up by these, like, probably Letheri. Well, they're Letheri. We know that because they're talking about making peaks, right? So he meets them, and they're like trying to hold him up, and is like, "What you want to do here?" And they're like, "No, we don't want to like actually prospect for gold. We're too good for that. We'll just wait until all the other stuff's tapped out, and then we'll just sell our claim to the highest bidders." And he's like, "What you going to do with that money?" It's like, "Well, what do you mean, what you're going to do with that money?" And that obviously is an important aspect, right? The idea of wealth for itself, right? Wealth being the goal, the goal itself, right? And this is something that I guess most of us probably don't think about it that much because we don't have that kind of money. But basically, what do you do with money once you've paid for all the stuff you actually need to live, once you've paid for all the things that make your life, nicer, right? It's like you have a home, you have food, you have all the like general stuff you need and can use every day. So what you do with the rest of it is like, at what point does become gathering money a goal in itself? At what point is it the actual goal and no longer just a means to an end, that end being survival or a acceptable or nice life? That's sort of like, I guess, the question there. And it's interesting to see that you have people that don't even understand the question. They're like, yeah, making money is the goal, getting wealthy is the goal. And that's kind of fucked up when you think about it. Because that's sort of like, that's sort of where you see like the difference between different lifestyles. Some of us, like the idea of like working to gain enough to actually eat well, live well, and that's it. And maybe spend the rest of your life doing the things you actually enjoy. Now, obviously, in a lot of places, that's not a possibility, and people work way too much to just make the bare minimum to survive or less. That's because of fucking capitalism. But on the other hand, there's the idea of making money just to make money, and that's the goal. And that's super fucking perverted when you think about like how far that goes away from like what life should be, right? In a way. And and I feel it's shown really well in that in that conversation, because it shows that Kyle doesn't understand their point, and they don't even understand the question. And the important aspect there is that those people, those three fighters that he then at the end of it actually has to kill anyway, they are not already well off. They're actually pretty fucking poor people, like almost everyone around that area, right? But they are. They have been indoctrinated so much. They have taken that idea of like making money as the only goal in life to heart, even though they will never actually make any proper money, which is sort of like the other thing that you see there, and that you also see when now in the overall things like that. Most like of the gold, I don't know if you're not gold diggers, but all those gold prospectors and so forth, they don't make a lot of money. It's not exactly, it's the dream that drags them there to become wealthy, and then they're there and they're just like as badly off as they were before, probably. Unless they fled from slavery, but who knows. But so that's like the first thing I wanted to look at, the idea that gold is sort of like, or monetary value, or money is seen as a goal in itself, which is kind of weird and crazy when once you think about it. It's unnatural is, I guess, the idea here. And the interesting aspect, however, is, or the important aspect to look at here, is to not make that a, to not make that a clear cut between, oh, civilization is unnatural because they only think about like making money, while all those people out there, like the tribesmen, like Kyle, are like actually living the good wild life, and they don't care about money that much. Like that whole noble savage cliche, that's not how this goes, and we'll see why that is the case in a second. I just wanted to point that out before we go, and then before someone gets the wrong idea here, because it's easy to go that way, and it's something that, especially, you know, like in our world over like say the 60s and 70s, with like the whole new age and whatever area, we a lot of people went that direction, like, oh, those people lived that with such great lives. There's a lot going wrong there as well, and that's sort of where we need to go to in a minute. What do I mean by that? This idea that in especially amongst the ice bloods in those holds and the holdings, while they may not, you know, strive for monetary wealth as a sign of status and whatnot, they on the other hand have blood feuds and the idea of honor. They have developed that to a level that is just as toxic as the striving for wealth for wealth's sake, right? To strive for honor and fight for honor's sake, and not think beyond that, is just as toxic. And someone like Lotchi Bane is exactly the other side of that medal, right? He's the other side of that coin, where you have the Letheri trying to get as much money as possible and not even think about why and what to do with that. Lotchi is ignoring everything that is actually important for his family, his tribe, what have you, just to gain more honor for like a specific principle, and that is to, you know, kill as many people as possible in duels, count coup and whatnot, and gain honor for honor's sake. And that is just as ridiculous, because the idea that we've spoken about before is formalized duels and the likes are a method for small groups of people to solve like military conflict or violent conflicts, while minimizing damage, right? It's like, if you need every person in the tribe to like make sure the tribe survives, gather food, what have you, then you can't just go into like an all-out battle and have a lot of people injured and die. You can't do that because it'll actually spell doom for the entire group of people, the entire tribe, family, what have you. You know what I mean? Point is, so what you do is, and that goes for both sides, so what you do is you decide on formalized duels, and you have like one champion per group, and they duel, and whoever wins decides the conflict. And that makes a lot of sense in that situation, right? That works really well in that situation. However, there are points where that becomes like, and it's tempting to at that point make winning duels, seeking out conflict, seeking out duels to kill, to gain personal honor, is just as ridiculous as seeking situations where you find as much coin as possible to gain personal wealth, because at that point it becomes a self-serving thing, and it's just for the sake of gaining that specific capital, which is sort of where you can go for like the Bourdieu analysis of capital. And while one of them is actual, economic, like monetary capital, the other one is symbolic capital, that, someone like social capital, something that like someone like Locci is striving for. But it's still just amassing capital for capital's sake, and that's wrong and stupid. Just saying. But we'll look at like more things in that regard. Remember a while ago I did like had a conversation with Iskar Jarak on the transactional nature of Malazan, or like the transactional themes in Malazan. We have another one of those here, and I feel it's an interesting one, and that is the conversation about the blood price that Kyle has with the wife of Kalhil, Jolvik, something like that. Something vaguely Norwegian sounding that is not Solveig, but it's Jolvik, something like that. Well, anyway, he has a conversation with her about the blood price, and he thinks of like, revenge for revenge, eye for an eye, that kind of blood price. So a violent deed means that you need to go and pay the blood price, which is, go there, have a blood feud, kill someone from the other tribe, other side, and so forth. And she reminds him that that's exactly that transactional thinking that comes from a society that has gone further down the path towards capitalism. Do you think of everything as an exchange? You think of everything as a transaction. It's like you kill one of my guys, I kill one of you guys, it kind of evens out, that kind of thing. But what she talks about, this is obviously the other side, the important aspect here is the blood price, meaning the cost to the person committing a violent act. Why killing leaves a mark on the person that does the killing, at least in that area. I mean, this is sort of the other thing, right? When we read fantasy, we talk about violent conflicts all the fucking time. They're so far removed from like how our world works, right? It's like we don't solve, like most of us, I hope, don't solve every single conflict we have in our lives by killing people or riding out and raiding their country. I hope. I really hope. Anyway, my point is the idea that violence is traumatic, not only to the person who suffers from the violence, but also very much for the person that commits the violence. Which is why we have so many veterans from all kinds of violent conflicts come home with all kinds of trauma. Because committing violence, especially planning to commit violence, doing that like leaves a mark on the person that does it. And I guess it's difficult to realize that unless you actually do it, unless you actually commit a violent crime, or not crime, but a violent act, because those things are irreversible, right? You kill someone, those people won't come back. You hurt someone, those things leave marks that cannot really be erased. So you carry that as a survivor of that situation, of that confrontation. You carry that with yourself until the end of days. So having that realization in there that goes way beyond the idea of like exchanging or having a transaction or whatever, however you want to call it, that idea of like blood for blood or whatever you want to call it. That's an important aspect there. It kind of leads into the idea that those people have a different insight, a that is not yet ruled by that overpowering sense of economy, that of like economic thinking that is going on there. But it is still, yeah, it's interesting to look, and it's important to be aware of that aspect of it. And Kyle understands it because Kyle has done violence and has seen people that have suffered deeply from it. And that's I guess one of the things that the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the novels of the Malazan Empire do so well, is showing us, the readers, the cost to the people that are arguably the winners of those conflicts, the survivors of those battles, the people that win the battles, and how they deal with the fact that they have killed other people. That's one of the big strengths of these books. There's other books out there that do the same, obviously in fantasy, and far more in novels of whatever, like realistic fiction written by survivors or like veterans of all kinds of wars. Like, I don't know, go ye out and read Slaughterhouse-Five. I mean, in general, do that because it's a fucking incredible book. It's sort of that kind of thing, I guess. All right. What else? I guess we need to have us a look at the Crimson Guard and Shimmer becoming more and more distanced from the rest, the idea of isolation of command. I think that's an interesting aspect to look at because we've always seen Shimmer wrestling with that, and I feel it works really well with Shimmer as a character. I mean, I do love Shimmer as a character in general. She's awesome. But her struggling with trying to remain one of the guys, so to speak, one of the troops, while also making decisions that possibly, probably endanger one of the other people. That's sort of like the interesting thing here, and I feel that's a conversation that like impinges on a lot of stuff that we tend not to associate with it, but it's exactly that. And what I mean by that is the idea of balance or imbalance of power. See, the point is, when they start out, Shimmer and all the other guys, the nominal commander is Kaz. He is in charge. He makes those decisions. Like, that's sort of like what every military commander does. They make decisions that will certainly kill some of their troops. That's just like how that shit works. Now, obviously, every commander tries to minimize those losses, but those losses will still happen. However, when you see someone like Shimmer, she's part of those troops, and she still technically is part of those troops because she's not officially in charge, sort of. But when we have the situation with the mages, right, and Petal, Blues, and Gwyn, I think Gwyn show up, and there's like trying to overcome the Ontos's Felak barrier, basically, on the Sea of Dread, is dangerous, and it may potentially kill one of those mages. At the end of the day, it's her making that decision. And at that point where the choice, who will possibly, potentially die, is laid at her feet, she has more power than those three mages. And suddenly she's no longer the same as the other general soldiers of the Crimson Guard. Suddenly she has a level of power that elevates her beyond that. And that's sort of where you suddenly cannot behave the same way anymore. You have to be careful. You have to kind of distance yourself, basically, to make that the hurt that will come if one of your decisions kills one of your friends, or like one of the people that you command. To minimize that hurt, that's sort of when you distance yourself from them. That's sort of where the distance of command comes from. And I feel it's interesting to see that with Shimmer, because Shimmer is such a honorable person, such a yeah, I feel honorable with a lot of integrity is sort of like the main thing that defines Shimmer. And her having to like subconsciously and then consciously realize that that's sort of where that whole thing is going over time is an interesting thing, an interesting look at the idea of how command kind of works or doesn't work. So yeah, there's that. Also having obviously another confrontation with Lady Mist, and is just interesting because, and this is something else that I find fascinating about the whole setting of Assail. We have the guys from Exile Keep show up, being terribly powerful sorcerers. We have Mist being a terribly powerful sorceress. That entire coast is full of crazy, insane mages doing insane shit. All these like crazy warlords that have sort of carved out their small empires on the coast. Now, are all of those natives? Probably not. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that whole idea of like lawlessness, I guess, is sort of what we need to look at here, because it kind of gives us an image of like how, in a way, how the Malazan Empire is sort of before Path to Ascendancy starts, or like at the beginning of Path to Ascendancy. Although even there's already more like organization. It's an argument on like how civilization is established, right? It's like, it's unfortunately rather close to your like your Thomas Hobbes and whatnot, which I'm not sure I agree with. But the idea is like, you have local strongmen carving out their own like empires, and then there's like an age of consolidation, and then you have larger like groups of or states or whatever battling it out until you have an empire or whatever. And with Assail, you're very much at the stage where it's all these like very small groups. In the inland, you have subsistence living groups, like those different tribes in the grasslands, and the Banes or the Ice Bloods up there in the holdings. But the next stage, so to speak, is happening on the coast, and there's where you have all those different groups grabbing different strong people, grabbing power, and most of them just rule and think through power, and that's the important aspect there, because that's not how a society works. That's not how you build a society. Society, as something more than just people living together, is built on more than we all do what the strong guy on the top says. That's like an argument that we've seen before. It's when you look in Opposite of the Throne, right? You have the guy called Butcher. I keep forgetting his actual name. Who is, grew up in like the outskirts of Darushistan, right? And he's that guy who grew up in those criminal gangs where like the top dog basically is the most violent guy, and he kicks everyone down, and he then actually joins the Malazan military and starts to learn about like how you actually within a society have stuff like solidarity and people helping each other, and thus actually furthering the good of the commonality. And that's sort of the thing that we see here, because right now with those different groups on the coast, that is not the case. So the groups like the older groups, the tribesmen, the Ice Bloods, possibly even the lowlanders like Ermin's gang, like before, like around Ronald the Bastard, although we need to talk about Ronald the Bastard in a second, are exactly on that level where there is at least in part mutual help and so forth, at least within those different groups. They're not cooperating one with another, at least some of them don't, but at least there's that. Whereas on the coast with the guys from Exile, the guys in Wrong Turn, the guys in Lady Mist. There's not even that. There is no actual society out there. It's just groups of people ruled by fear and violence and power. And that's the interesting thing. That's mimicked, or not mimicked, but like mirrored by those groups on those ships, right? When you look at the Crimson Guard on the one hand, where there is that mutual like brotherhood or whatever, and then you look at the Marish group with Reyes. Is it Reyes? You know what I mean, with Storval and the gang, and there that form of society has broken down. It's once again like rule, the rule of the strongest, and that's fucked up. And it's important to be aware of the fact that that is fucked up, because that's exactly where contemporary like right wing or sort of politics are leading. Is exactly that, the idea that like the strong, like, you know, that whole bullshit of like alphas and whatnot, that's exactly where that goes. Like the strongest survive, the strongest make the rules, and the rest has to follow. That's not how human society works. That's not how civilization works. If you believe otherwise, you are fucking wrong. And it's good to see that shared in these books in that way, because it's an old argument, what makes a society and what doesn't. And to see that here is something that I really appreciate. All right. So what else should we talk about for a second here? Arriving with Ronald the Bastard. Now there's an interesting thing happening throughout the book. That is the stuff that we don't see. Remember when Fisher leaves at the Bone Bridge to meet the Badlands and Coots? Mal of Gris, whatever his guys or the Raiders are, I keep forgetting his name, and Marshal Teal are still one group. I will remember his name, Raygon, something like that. The Jenneback pirate dude, the Broad, that dude. They're all still one group. And now, once we come back, we find Marshal Teal and the Letheri outside the walls of Mantletown, and Mal being an advisor to Ronald the Bastard, and the Jennebacken down there as so-called navy of Mantletown. It's interesting to see that, because when we started out, the Jennebacken pirates were the very, very antisocial ones, going out for looting, raping, and whatnot. And now they're suddenly on the side of order, whereas Teal has made common cause with everyone else to take over and burn down Mantletown. And apparently, Leanne is also part of that crew, which is sort of the fallout of the scene with Kyle. So we get Kyle gets another situation to be a romantic idiot, I guess, which is that situation when he faces Leanne and understand that she is following like a larger drive and is putting her honor, not honor, but her duty or her perceived duty above her personal feelings. And I don't know. It's difficult for me to talk about that part, because it's like, yeah, that's how relationships or non-relationships start and fail, because people have different motives and are unclear and suck at communicating them. But I'll leave it at that. But it's interesting because we don't know how that whole situation shakes out. At least we don't know yet how Marshal Teal ends up out there with the outlaws trying to besiege Mantletown, and Mal ends in there, basically taking over already from Ronald the Bastard, who is once again one of those petty strongmen who has no idea of like how politics or how society works. He just rules because he's the strongest one, sort of. He was, until all those foreigners show up, and that's how that works. And because he is that incompetent, and we already know that he's fucking incompetent, he'll probably lose his place, because, you know, once again, he's not able to actually think outside his personal, system, so to speak. Which brings us to one of the last things I wanted to look at for a quick second before we actually end this. Two things probably. One, the quick aside that a subsistence economy, it's not even an economy, but like a subsistence society, will always succumb to the invasion of an agrarian society, because an agrarian society has way more people, can feed more people, and thus like muster more people, and that just by the sheer weight of numbers, the lowlanders will at some point overtake and overcome the ice bloods up there in their holdings. So they'll always just like be pushed further north into like the margins of the world. And yeah, that's fucking sad. It is fucking sad. And the inevitability of that is the tragedy of it. And that's, as I said, it's something that we've seen before in the Malazan books, but it's just like actually spelled out very clearly this time around, which gives, I feel like, I've not said that before, but Assail has this whole like sense of doom, of tragedy, of inevitability hanging over it. It's like you see that country and you're like, wow, this actually it wasn't a perfect country, it was far from a perfect country. But then outsiders come in and just like destroy the whole fucking thing, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because that's exactly how it will always happen if a more advanced, technologically advanced group of people will show up. They'll just like destroy because they don't get it, and then they'll just like take the whole thing down and wreck everything, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's so fucking sad. And that's like sort of that sense that I get from Assail. I still love the book, don't get me wrong. I just like feel that's sort of like the overarching atmosphere of this one. So yeah, there's that. Like, and the final thing once again is the idea, and this is obviously once again something that we've seen in history before, right? You have the Sayers, you have the Lost. They're both like trying to unite to kill, to defend their holdings against the Lowlander invasion. But at the same time, the Banes, especially Lochi Bane, are sticking to the old rules of feuding amongst each other and thus ruining all the chances of the Ice Bloods to actually defend their holdings. And there's an interesting side to that, which we have when we have Kyle conversing with Kulheel, right? Which is, we should honor with Kulheel with his son, which is like all the Ice Bloods, the Heels, the Losts, the Sayers, they should all unite. And it's like, and build an army and become like the others. And that's exactly what this is about. This is about like different ways of life. And there's always that idea like that to defend, to defeat the enemy, you have to become like the enemy, which is at least true in part. And that's sort of the sad side of this. Like, if the Ice Bloods want to be victorious on the field of battle, and this just like keep their territory in like a pure conflict against those invaders, they need to change their way of life. But will they still be the same Ice Bloods afterwards? The answer is obviously no, they will not. And that's something that we've seen before in the Malazan Book of the Fallen and in the novels of the Malazan Empire. The idea of like how much do you have to change to survive, and are you then still the same kind of person? Which kind of raised that question, like how much is like a cultural identity? How much is that part of who people really are? Is survival of the actual living beings the same thing as survival of their culture? And I guess that's a question that's like very, very difficult to answer. I have no real answer for that, but it's one that is sort of implicitly asked here again as well. So yeah, I guess that's sort of where we'll end it for tonight. There's more in those chapters. There's certainly Fisher's song that bears examining, which is all about like how the acts of mortals are just insignificant. All of this shit will just like pass, and most of it like will crumble because people are fucking stupid. And that's very, very sad and terrible. But I don't have the mental capacity to talk about all of that today, so I'll either remember it tomorrow and have more thoughts on it, or it'll just be lost for now and we'll talk about it sometime later. And I'll be back tomorrow with like the next couple of chapters from Assail. Until then, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you tomorrow, I guess. Until then, cheers.